What do you make of the latest actions from Russia?
Well, President Zelensky today is questioning how are we moving towards the ceasefire when Russia has done this onslaught of attacks across Ukraine, which you did a very good job of summarizing. And he has a point, right? President Trump has put a lot of pressure on both sides, and that has been positive in the sense that it seems like a potential ceasefire is closer. But what we don't really know is whether President Putin really intends to have good faith negotiations over a ceasefire, or whether he's just telling President Trump what he thinks President Trump wants to hear while he just continues as normal with his attacks on Ukraine, trying to gain more territory, trying to gain more leverage. And notably also, the demands he has recently made on Ukraine are demands that President Zelensky will never agree to, and likely the Trump administration is not going to agree to as well, including he wants to demilitarize Ukraine, which would be crazy because Ukraine then would be open even more to being attacked and invaded by Russia. He also is calling for President Zelensky to step down, which is really ironic. His claim is that President Zelensky is not democratically elected because he delayed elections due to the war. The reason I call that ironic is because President Putin hasn't been democratically elected in more than 20 years. There hasn't been a free and fair election. He assassinates every potential adversary he has who will run against him and has a chance of beating him. So Russia is the country that doesn't have a true democracy. Ukraine, on the other hand, has in a responsible way delayed its election due to the fact that a part of the country is occupied and they can't have elections there.
So let's talk on that because Ukrainian President Zelensky capitulated to President Trump. There were that very tense exchange there in the Oval Office where President Trump told Zelensky, you are not grateful enough for everything that the United States has done. And then he backed down and he said, no, we are grateful. We will agree to this ceasefire proposal. Putin has not done the same. President Trump has had very strong words for both leaders. So where does this stand? What are the next steps for the Trump administration if Putin does not sit down at the table and at least have some serious negotiations?
Well, you're right. After that dissonance in the Oval Office, President Zelensky changed his tune a little bit. He kind of recognized how to use language that would be more appealing to President Trump, describe in more accurate ways his gratitude for the United States and what the United States has done. He's also been open to signing a minerals deal and some of the other things that President Trump has demanded. And so now we see President Putin and Russia really as the recalcitrant party. Hopefully that's what President Trump recognizes. I know going into taking office, the Trump administration and the Trump transition was saying that they believed that they had to keep the pressure on Russia in order to get Putin to come to the table in good faith and to make compromises. So keeping the pressure on Russia means continuing the flow of weapons from the United States and from the European countries to Ukraine, so Ukraine does not lose ground on the battlefield, and keeping the sanctions in place, maybe even adding more sanctions on Russia. That should be the strategy and plan to get Putin to come to the table. It's not clear if President Trump is going to continue to pursue that, but notably, while he paused weapons and intelligence sharing for a little while, he has resumed them. And the best strategy would be to continue the weapons flow, continue the intelligence sharing, and increase sanctions on Russia so that Russia feels maximum pressure.
So when it comes to the reality of a potential ceasefire, is it very far-fetched, or do you think realistically something could happen?
I think it's not far-fetched on the Ukrainian side. I was just in Ukraine 2 months ago, and I'll be back there next month. And each time I've gone, I've seen and talked to people who are increasingly war weary. So they would very much like for the war to end. And President Zelensky has his finger on the pulse of the Ukrainian people. He recognizes that they want the war to end, but he doesn't want the war to end, and they don't want the war to end on just any terms. They can't give up too much to Russia, because if they do, they'll be vulnerable to further invasion and attacks by Russia. So really, the question as to whether a ceasefire is possible is a question about what does Putin really intend. Is he war weary? Is he thinking we've lost half our military, we've lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers, the cost is too high, I want a way out of this war? Or is he thinking no cost is too high, I want to dominate and control Ukraine, and until I do, I won't stop? If it's the latter, then I don't think a ceasefire is realistic, because if President Putin truly intends, as he did in February 2022 when he invaded, to control Ukraine, he's not even close to that. That would require him getting into Kiev, toppling the government, putting in place, a pro-Russian puppet. He's not there yet, and if he did a ceasefire now, he wouldn't get that.
And I have to imagine a lot of this has to do with President Putin wanting to save face. He is not known as a leader to back down. He's known as the one to be the aggressor. So when it comes to a potential ceasefire, how can there be, an apparent win-win, situation? What would that potentially look like?
Well, if there is a ceasefire, whatever the terms are, Putin will claim it was a victory for him and for Russia, because you're right, he wants to save face, and he has a very high view of himself and very big ego. And he has riled up the Russian people. And remember, Russia does not have access to information from outside the world. It's highly censored. Anyone who's on TV or writing newspaper articles in Russia, giving the Russian people the news, is taking a pro-Putin slant, is arguing that the operation in Ukraine was necessary for the security of Russia. So he has to be able to convince those people who he's riled up with nationalism that he achieved the goals of the operation. But then again, I would say that whatever he decides is probably not going to be, suffering much pushback from the Russian people, because again, political dissent is not really possible in Russia. If you speak out against Putin, if you speak out against his policies and his decisions, you'll likely end up in jail.
All right. Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how this process unfolds. David, we appreciate you taking the time to joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you.
And we are going to follow all of the breaking news and every development